You are listening to the Makers Church podcast. For more information about our community, please visit makerschurch.org.
You know, I love this series that we've been in, Focus, the search for what matters most, because if you're like me, I just spend way too much energy on stuff that doesn't matter. Just way too much energy on stuff that doesn't matter. And so we've been walking together as a church through the book of 1 Corinthians. And if you've been journeying with us, I hope that you've been as frustrated as me as you read 1 Corinthians. And you just look at the interactions that the Apostle Paul is having with this church in Corinth. And there's stuff, I don't even know what to do with it. It's like the gristly meat that you can't really swallow. You got to keep chewing on it. You're like, I don't even know what to do with that. But there's some stuff in here that I think is going to move us forward together as a community. And I'm excited about this talk that I titled, The Right to Be Wrong. And it's in the book of 1 Corinthians chapter 8. And just a refresher for those of you that haven't been journeying with us or you don't know exactly where we're coming from. 1 Corinthians, it's a letter that the Apostle Paul wrote to the church that he founded in Corinth. And it's a reply, it's a response to a letter that they wrote him, asking him a bunch of questions about what they needed answers to. And so what we're reading when you read 1 Corinthians, it's like a reply all, it's a response letter to a church in a city called Corinth. And Corinth was this trade city. It was at this little narrowing of land, this little isthmus that almost all trade had to funnel through. And so you can imagine that it attracted all sorts of different kinds of crazy people. And so there were all sorts of faith traditions and all sorts of different practices and paganism and Judaism and now Christianity, and they're all blending together. And the church in Corinth seems confused, and they need some clarity on how do we move forward. And so they write this letter to Paul, and they ask him a bunch of strange questions, and he attempts to write them back, but we see stuff unfold like this in 1 Corinthians 8. He says, now about food sacrificed to idols, we know that we all possess knowledge, but knowledge puffs up while love builds up. Those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know, but whoever loves God is known by God. So then about eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing at all in the world and that there is no God but one. And then we jump ahead to verse 7. But not everyone possesses this knowledge. Some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to a god, and since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. But food does not bring us near to God. I disagree. We are no worse if we do not eat, and better if we do. Be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block for the weak. For if someone with a weak conscience sees you with all of your knowledge eating in an idol's temple, won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother or sister for whom Christ died is destroyed by your knowledge. When you sin against them in this way and wound their weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if I eat what causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I will never again eat meat again, which sounds awful. So that I will not cause them to fall. I love Paul. He's as scattered as I am. I don't know if you caught what's happening in here, but he's like a tangential maven. He's so good at just not answering the question. And he's like, boom, over here, squirrel over here. He's all over the place. And he begins to look like he actually doesn't know what he's talking about. But when you strip it down, you begin to realize that he absolutely knows what matters most. He starts out with a few words. He says, about those things concerning eating food sacrificed to idols. And then he totally changes the conversation and brings in some kind of weird, tangential, crazy stuff. And he starts talking about knowledge puffing up and love building up, and you kind of think you know everything, but you really don't know anything, is basically what he says. And I think it's interesting that he knows how to strip away and get to the heart of the question. Have you ever had anybody ask a question, but they're really making a statement? See, I think this is actually what's going on. When I read it, I go, oh, these poor Corinthians, they're so confused. They're looking for some clarity. But Paul knows better. See, Paul knows the Corinthian mindset. He knows how much they loved philosophy and the need to be right. He knew how much they loved to argue and build cases to prove themselves right. And what they're looking for in this question is to build a case, to get Paul as an ally, to prove a point, to be right. See, they have a conviction that it is not wrong for them to eat food sacrificed to idols, and maybe their intentions are pure. Maybe their intentions are pure. Maybe they know that it was absolutely inseparable. You actually could not eat meat without knowing whether or not it was sacrificed to idols. Because the way it worked in those days is almost all meat was brought to some sort of temple for a sacrifice. And whatever the priests didn't need, they would sell back into the marketplace. And so there was no possible way for you to know if you were eating meat sacrificed to idols or not. And so maybe they knew that maybe they were being intentional and missional. Let's just give them the benefit of the doubt. Like they just go, well, we know that if we don't eat meat, then we can't associate, we can't congregate, we can't be with those who might be far from us. We'll have a chance to have a good influence on them. We want to make sure that we're with the people. Maybe they're in this crisis of how do we be in the world but not of the world? Maybe they're wrestling with these issues. Or maybe they just love meat and they really don't want to give it up. But I think Paul, he begins to hone in on, he begins to grasp right away that he knows that that's not what they're doing. They're looking to build a case so that they can be proven right. And what they have done, what the church in Corinth had begun to do was start to elevate themselves against each other by what they knew. They valued knowledge over love. And so before Paul even answers the question, he disarms them. And he says, knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. Knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. And I love his 1-2 punch as he's beginning to just disarm them and pull them out of their own arrogance. He not only says that love, that knowledge puffs up and love builds up, he says this. He says, those who think they know something do not yet know as they ought to know. Basically what he's saying is, you think you know it all, but you know nothing. You think you have it all figured out, but the time will come to pass and you will realize that what you thought was true and good and perfect and right now, it will change. Have you ever been there? Remember when you used to think like the Chargers were like a great team and that one day they would actually make it to the Super Bowl? Like time passed on and you wised up to it, and now we have a lot of Padres fans in this city. And we'll find out someday that they're a lost cause too. Go San Diego Gulls. Have you ever been there before? Where you were so adamant that this thing is right, that your knowledge about something was accurate, and you fought so hard for it. And then like a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, not only do you not believe that anymore, you're embarrassed that you did. And I was thinking about this experience I had at work the other day, which was ridiculous, but I hated coffee my whole life, and now I'm a full-blown addict. I did not like coffee. My wife, at the time, my girlfriend, worked at Starbucks. I could have had all the free coffee I ever could have had, and I hated it. I used to think it tasted awful. I said tea tasted like dirt water. I didn't like any of it. And all of a sudden, I grew to love coffee, and now I'm what you would call a coffee snob. And now I have all of these opinions, this knowledge about coffee, and I know what a good cup of coffee is and what a bad cup of coffee is. And I went to work the other day, and we do coffee pretty good at work. We're all addicts, so we've created kind of a level playing field where we get good coffee, and there's a certain way you make it in the firehouse. And by the way, I work as a fireman if we don't know each other. And I didn't just like stroll into a firehouse one day. And and I get to work, and I have 3 kids, and mornings are awesome. And so when I get to work, all I want is a nice cup of coffee. And I'm not even a man of like tradition or routine, but that's the thing. You go straight in, you get on the PA, hey, I got you, I'm relieving you, I need a cup of coffee. And I go in and I pour some cup of coffee, and I know automatically that something's off. It smells different. And I bring it to my mouth, and I take one sip of it, and I spew it across the kitchen. Because it was hazelnut coffee. And I'm going to tell you, friends, I was not pastoral in this moment. I went on a rampage. And if you don't know the fire department, we are pretty real with each other. We yell at each other a lot. We keep it real. They actually don't know I'm a pastor because I'm so real all the time. And I went on a rampage. I spewed coffee across the kitchen, and I'm like, what is this crap? And I got on a soapbox, and I was like, this is a fire department cardinal sin. You cannot serve hazelnut coffee. And I just lost it. And the guys were like, whoa. I mean, they were literally backing up. And the guy who runs the coffee fund got in my face, and he's way bigger than me, so I kind of backed down a little bit. And he was like, you want to take on the coffee fund? You can have the coffee fund. And he went in his room and got the money. He threw it at me. It was this big thing. And it wasn't even like fun. It wasn't joking. This was all real. This is like a week ago. And it was awful. And I was like, who was that guy? And they were yelling about hazelnut coffee. But I just lost it. And I thought I was so right. I'm like, clearly everyone's with me. Like, who likes hazelnut coffee? And all the other guys were like, it's kind of good. I mean, we don't really mind it. And all of a sudden, I'm alone on this issue. I'm on an island. And all these guys are like, we kind of dig it, man. We should maybe move to hazelnut. And I'm like dying in my own skin. And I had this weird out-of-body experience about how right I was to myself, but nobody else was with me. And so much so that I was a jerk about it. I mean, I went off the handle over coffee. Like over coffee. And I think we can do this all the time in super petty, menial ways, and in really, really damaging, important, poignant ways. And this is the crisis that the church is still in, where we have become so puffed up over what we think we know, that we have drawn circles around things, and we've become divided over what we think is true, over the way we understand the way God works, under the way we understand that we should do something or not do something. And we have a lineage of a divided church over things that people thought they were right about. And then you look back over time, the church killed people because other people thought the world was round. Can you believe that? People died because people read the Bible and thought the Bible proved that the earth was flat. How idiotic and foolish. We look back now. Hindsight's always 20/20. Go, how could you ever believe that? Slavery. Totally approved in the Bible. How did you fight for slavery if you were an advocate for it? What did you use? The Bible. Someone's knowledge of God. Someone's knowledge of what it means to be puffed up and so sure and fighting for truth. And I love that in the early days, as the church is beginning to develop, Paul uses these words. He says, those who think they know something do not know yet as they ought to know. Isn't it true that we're all in progress? Isn't it true that we're evolving, that we're changing, that we're growing, that we're becoming enlightened, that we're seeing things that we've never seen before, that we're pivoting from, we're moving from things we thought once were true and now we're not so sure about it? Have you ever been there? I mean, if it's stuff like coffee and it has the ability to divide a relationship, how much more does our understanding of God have the ability to do that? And we assert ourselves, and we are so sure of ourselves, and we fight over things, and we diminish and we push out other people because they don't see God the way we see God or understand God the way we understand God. And Paul says, I'm not even going to answer the question about food being sacrificed to idols because you are coming about it the wrong way. Knowledge puffs up, but love, it builds up. You know, if you're super smart, this is like a convicting statement. Like if you're like a intellectual type, you love knowledge. If you're dumb like me, you're like, I get it. You know, I just took the captain's test at work, and I actually did better than I thought I did, which is awesome. But all my buddies who did better than me, knowledge, buddy, puffs up, man. That's like my defense. You'll get yours. Knowledge puffs up love, but they don't even know what I'm talking about. But that's like my own thing, like my defense, you know. But we've come to this place where we think we can have it all figured out at times, and it is so far from the truth. And Paul is pointing to this, and this has shaped our church. I mean, we have a core value. We picked 4 words that we thought would embody us as a church, and one of those things is unfinished. We just believe that we are unfinished. It's not because we're fickle. It's not because we can't make our minds up. It's not because we're just confused. It's not because we're fickle. It's because God is transformational. And God is changing us. That's the whole point of sanctification, of growing, of being transformed. How foolish would it be if we stayed in the understanding that we have? And so we just believe as a church, as a people, that we are unfinished, that we are all across the spectrum at different points in the journey, coming alive in different things, having different things open up to us and shine into us and become aha moments for us along the way. We say it like this: we believe that transformation is a process. We're all works in progress. Our hope is to be constantly remade and renewed by the power of Jesus Christ. And even though that this has plagued our whole faith tradition of churches, this is where denominations come from, this is where arguing comes from. The internet is the worst possible thing that ever happened to Christendom, where people just attack each other over different things, and politics gets involved, and it's ugly out there. Everyone's calling everyone a heretic. It's ridiculous. And Paul is not going to stand for this. He's saying we cannot elevate knowledge over love. The unfortunate thing is, when we do that, it's where the old phrase, preaching to the choir, comes from. When we live like this, all we do is surround ourselves with people who think like us and act like us and value the things that we value, and we have no sounding board for perspective. We have no one to pull us up or pull us out. We have no one to learn from because we surround ourselves with clones of ourselves. It's the most detrimental thing that can happen to the church. And I think one of the most practical ways that I have experienced this show its head in our church is people ask me all the time, Derrick, what is Maker's Church's stance on fill in the blank? What is Maker's Church's stance on fill in the blank? You know, a lot of our history, people have loved to jump to those answers. People, this is what makes you a Baptist, or this is what makes you Episcopalian, or this is what makes you Presbyterian. These things, these creeds, these doctrines, these things are what make us us, and they aren't us. But Paul is like, I'm not even going to let you argue about food. And not even coffee. And people ask me that question all the time, Derrick, what is the church's stance, what is Maker's Church's stance on fill in the blank? And I'm like, I don't even know how to answer that question. Because Maker's Church is not a person. Maker's Church is a collection of people. Mostly of followers of Jesus Christ, some who are skeptics, some who are trying to figure it out. All are welcome here. We're all at different places in our spiritual journey. We all come from different faith traditions and backgrounds and misunderstandings. We all have truths right now in our gut that we believe to be true, convictions and even values that are guiding our lives that tomorrow may be different. We're not fickle. We serve a God who's transformational, a God who is working things out in us. And so when you say, what is Maker's Church's stance on X, Y, or Z? I go, I don't know. You'd have to poll all of us on that issue. Because we're all coming to the table with a different mindset, a different understanding, many times a different misunderstanding, but we're all here. We're all here together. And this is exactly what Paul was driving towards, that we would be here together. That we would journey with each other. And so when people ask me, Derrick, what's Maker's Church's stance on this? I go, I don't know. I can't give you an answer. I can only tell you where I land. But don't put any teeth into that because I'm going to be different tomorrow. And so we wrestle together. And we walk together. And we journey together. And the best way I can frame it is that Maker's Church is a third way community. Where we don't see things as binary. Black or white, this or that, Republican or Democrat, or whatever theological issue you want to geek out on. Free will or predestination or annihilation, or some of you nerds out there know exactly what I'm talking about. And we love to argue and put ourselves in these categories. And I just go, no, we're a third way. There's a third way. It's not that or that. It's not binary. It's not black or white. It's all of us coming to an open table to have a conversation and to journey together and to learn from each other. And God is the one who does the transforming. God is the one who awakens us. God is the one who reveals to us. And so I don't know how to answer those questions of what is our stance on this or that. But I know that one helpful thing for the staff and I, and as we talk about this stuff, I think there's 3 categories that we need to learn how to put things in so that we know exactly where we're coming from. I think the biggest divide, the biggest shift that happens is that we are all coming from different places on different things. The severity of importance of one issue is different when we approach these things. And so I think it's important to know that there's a difference between orthodoxy, or what we call doctrine, conviction, and opinion. There's doctrine, there's conviction, and there's opinion. And the biggest miss is that we put different things into different categories, and then we come to the table pretending like we're all coming from the same place. And I think the most important thing that we can do when we sit down together at this open table and we approach things from the third way is we have to know, we have to have a jumping off point. Where do these things fall for you in your understanding of who God is, what He's calling you to do? For us as a church, we're very clear about what is doctrine. We didn't reinvent the wheel. It's the Nicene Creed. It's the Apostles' Creed. It's the things that pretty much all of Christendom agrees on. And the rest we say is up for discussion. And some of you will put those things in a conviction camp, and it will change the way you live your life. Some of you put those things in an opinion box, and it's fun. You can just talk about it without too much stress. And over your life, you will see some things may move in and out of those different categories, but the biggest problem in the church is we have made way too many things doctrine that simply are not. And what Paul is doing here is he is settling the score for them, and he's going, no. Your knowledge, the things that you think you know, it's only going to ruin you, because there's a huge difference between knowledge and wisdom. Knowledge has pride leak into it, but wisdom is all about humility. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be transformed in our minds like the scriptures say we will be. I'm not saying that we shouldn't have clarity or that we shouldn't land in some places. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be guided by convictions or we shouldn't be open to the Holy Spirit. It's exactly what I'm saying we should be. But what is at stake, what is taking place, is that he is calling this church to be a church known by their love, not by their knowledge. And he isn't trying to tear them down. He isn't trying to get them to step back, but essentially what he says in the rest of the passage is like these old cliches that we use, like a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. Or like no man left behind. The other one is like people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. What he's saying is, yes, we should aim at building each other up. He doesn't say like, just let everyone believe whatever they want to believe. He doesn't say just let it be this free for all. He says, no, what will build up, what will help people grow, what will pull people up, what will help people step into a full life that God is changing is not your knowledge, but your love. See, love is what will do the changing. We should aim, in the words of Evan, to call each other out and call them up. I love that statement. Elder Evan, the wise guy. He says that, just don't call people out. You call them up. And you don't call people out and up with all your wisdom and all your knowledge. You call them out and you call them up with love. When we walk together in love, Paul is saying this is what changes. And then he goes on to say this in verse 3. He says, but whoever loves God is known by God. Whoever loves God is known by God. He says, look, it doesn't matter what you know. It doesn't matter who you know. Anybody you know like that? Like, I know this person. They don't know you. So it doesn't matter. We give ourselves accolades. Oh, we know that person. We know this thing. We know that thing. And Paul is going, it doesn't matter what you know. It matters who you're known by. And if you want to be known by the God of the universe, if you want to be connected to him, then your love is where that will take place. Not your knowledge. Not your knowledge. He says, if you want to be known by God, then go and love. And you will pull each other up. So then he goes on to say in verse 4. So then about eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing at all in the world. Do you notice he's quoting their language? See the quotes? They said that. He said, we know that an idol is nothing at all in the world and that there is no God but one. That's great stuff to know. He agrees with them. He's like, we know this. We know this. But not everyone knows that. Not everyone possesses this knowledge. Some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to a god, and since conscience is weak, it is defiled. But food does not bring us near to God. Once again, I disagree. Anybody had a God moment when you had something delicious? But we are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. Be careful, however, that the exercise of your rights does not become a stumbling block to the weak. I just got to believe that Paul's language of weak and strong, it's tongue-in-cheek. He knows that they're so mighty and they're so knowledgeable that he sees those who don't know what they know as weak. And he's going, yeah, they're weak. They're not as strong as you. But do not let your rights become a stumbling block to them. For if someone with a weak conscience sees you with all your knowledge eating in an idol's temple, won't that person be emboldened to eat what is sacrificed to idols? So this weak brother or sister for whom Christ died is destroyed by your knowledge. So many people have been destroyed by each other's knowledge. And what he's saying is, look, we want to help each other, but we are all connected. In fact, he says later on, what you do to them, you do to me. When you sin against them, you sin against me. We're so connected that you can't outpace someone. You can't move past where someone's at. We all got to go together. You ever done those cheesy team building things at work or whatever, where you got to get everyone over the wall, or you got to make something that's impossible and you got to figure it out together? This is what he's talking about. It doesn't matter how witty you are, how knowledgeable, or how smart you are, you cannot outpace each other because we've all got to go together. And so when you let your knowledge outpace someone, they trip over it and they fall. What he's saying is, no, if you come back and you act in love, if you nurture someone and you walk with them and you journey with them, it is then that they will be called up and out, that they will grow up. It says love builds up, and God wants nothing more than to build his church. And Paul is showing us how to do that. Get off your high horse. Quit thinking that you know it all and be open to God showing you something new. What he's showing us here in the end of it, he says, when you sin against them in this way and you wound the weak conscience, you sin against Christ. Therefore, if what I eat causes my brother or sister to fall into sin, I would never eat meat again. Dude's going to become a vegan because he cares more about them than he does his own appetite, so that it will not cause them to fall. See, what Paul is doing is he's teaching them how to both exercise and restrain their freedom. See, just because we're free to do something doesn't mean we should, especially if it causes someone else to stumble. Look, Paul knew that he was right about this. He even agreed with them. Idols, it's just wood. It's just stone. I know in his own head he probably thought, these idiots, it's not gonna leak into the meat. There's only one God anyways. There's no power there. Meat can't come possessed by some idol. He knows that. But instead of trying to prove his point, he wanted to make a difference. Instead of having the need to be right, he stepped into a life of love and he called the rest of the church to that. You know why he did that? Because he gave his life to following Jesus, who did the very same thing. Could you imagine what this world would be like if Jesus waited for all of us to wise up? To get it all figured out, to have it all set in stone and be able to articulate it and vomit it back to each other and just regurgitate all of these decrees and creeds and things that are confusing anyways? No, the scriptures say that while we were still sinners, while we had none of it figured out, he stepped down. He slowed. He didn't outpace us. He didn't go, I've already got holy figured out. See ya. He stepped into human history, took on flesh and blood, lived a perfect and sinless life, died, conquered death, rose again, all because not of what he knew, but because of his love for us. Man, what would it look like for us to be known by love? Where we could sit at the table with people who are different than us, who come from different places and different understandings. And we looked at each other as long as they were in Christ. We'd see them as family. And for every single person who was far from God, we saw them as potential family members. And we did not let our knowledge puff us up. We allow our love to build us together. Let's pray.
You are listening to the Makers Church podcast. For more information about our community, please visit makerschurch.org.